second and third degree burns. She was never the same after that. They had to carry her most of the time around places. So you had Buck with his head blown off, Blanche with a glass full of glass, and Bonnie who was, the burns. That was in Clyde City, Missouri. It's called the Red Crown Inn. There's a guy down there. His name's Jim Spahn. I'm friends with Jim. He's the expert on the Platte City. I guess if you want to call, I don't like to call myself an expert, but when people want to know about the Dexfield Park, they do call me. But this guy, if I want to know something more about Platte City, I call him. There's people like that all over the Midwest. It's kind of our specialty at outlaws. But anyway, this is the Red Crown Inn. Go ahead, Mike. They went up Highway 169. Okay, yeah, and they stopped at a little store. This is outside of Mount Airy. You guys ever know where Mount Airy is at? Okay, this is like southeast of Mount Airy. There's this little country store. And when I was working up in Perry, there was a fellow that lived, he was from Mount Airy, and he brought me a bunch of stuff about Bonnie and Clyde, and they stopped at this little country store. I don't know about Greene County. I know like in Dallas County, the Panther store and Kennedy Station, and I mean these little stores were out in the countryside. Instead of having to drive into town, farmers would bring their stuff in and they'd trade their eggs and their cream and be able to buy things rather than have to drive the stupid dirt roads into town and waste a day. But they stopped here, bought lunch meat, bought sandwiches, and bread and pop and some. I don't think they were selling beer there. And they did get beer eventually someplace. But anyway, they stopped there, right outside of Mount Airy. Go ahead, Mike. They ended up outside of Dexter. We think they came up 169 probably to Adel, came across on Old Highway 6, came through Dexter. Then they took the county road out to 3 miles north of Dexter. This is where this old amusement park was at. My biggest question, and I still don't understand how Clyde Barrow knew about this campground. This campground was like a half a mile off the road. It was back in the timber. There was an areas cleared off where people could come and camp out. In this picture, to be up on top of where the top of the hill is here, the trees, it's in that area. I take people out there. If you want to come out there sometime, unfortunately now I got to get permission. Before the people let me just come out there and come and go. But now I got to get permission to do it. But the campground was up above where this old amusement park was. Okay? But how Clyde knew about that? Because he made a beeline. He made a beeline for that campground because he knew that it was back in the brush. Nobody's going to bother them. And they knew that they were pretty safe there. They knew that the park had been abandoned. They didn't spend time down here. I could talk to you for 45 minutes about the amusement park, but you don't want to hear that. But that amusement park was the biggest one in the state of Iowa. From 1915 until 1932 when it closed. You can barely see the swimming pool fed by a natural spring. It's an amazing story. It's just truly amazing that they put this thing out there right in the middle of nowhere, basically. But that's where the Barrow Gang ended up. Mike, go ahead. That's a picture of the pool. Go ahead, Mike. Okay, they started making trips into Dexter. Go ahead, Mike. This is one of the stores that they stopped at. This is the grocery store, and it's called Bloom's Grocery Store. It's still there when I was growing up. There's a restaurant there, and this is where Clyde would come in and get his takeout meals. He'd buy 5 takeouts. 5 takeouts. Real plates, real silverware, real glasses, all that stuff. All that stuff. I don't think he got glasses on, but he took the silver on the plates, the food, you know. But anyway, they would take those 5 takeouts, and they said they most of the time bought steak and chicken. Most expensive stuff, but they didn't complain because they were paying cash on this. But anyway, this is where they bought most of their takeout food. There's another restaurant in Dexter called Myers Cafe, and I have talked to some people from there, and supposedly they say Clyde was, he frequented that area too, the 5 days that he was in Dexter. But that's the Blooms. Go ahead, Mike. This is the front of a clothing store. The guy who worked as a clerk in the clothing store. This just tells you about. I was telling you, people in Dexter didn't know who these guys were. The clerk in the store was a town constable, John Love. John Love was the constable of Dexter when I was growing up. He retired, I think, in '65 or '66. So, but anyway, John Love was the town constable, and he worked his day job, did his constable stuff at night, worked in there. He had a shoe shop too. You guys remember shoe shops? You got your shoes repaired? It wasn't, oh, I got a hole in this, I'm going to throw it away. I can't remember throwing a pair of shoes away, my mom. Go see John. You can put a piece of leather on that hole that you wore in the shoe. But anyway, John Love. This is John Love's story. You know, I just want to tell you, most of the stories that I'm telling you came from, they come from people that were there. They're no longer with us, but they either wrote them down or I talked to them. So all the things I'm telling you is what they told me. It's not what I read out of the book. It's what people told me. I just want you to understand. And they might have been exaggerating too. So I mean, John Love was one that liked to exaggerate. But anyway, John Love. Here's his story. He said, "Yeah, this slight guy comes walking into the store, and John said, I always like to eyeball people when they walk in because I know they're going to buy some kind of shirt. I'm trying to figure out what size they are. Okay." And he said this guy had a southern drawl, slight guy. Clyde was 5'7", 135 pounds. Bonnie Parker, 4'9", 95 pounds. Walks in, walks up to the counter, says, "I'll buy some shirts." John said, "Well, I have all different kinds of shirts. 3 different kinds, in fact." And he looked at this. He said, "This guy looked at me and he said, well," he said, "I want arrow." Does that mean anything? Yeah. Usually, if it's a younger audience, they say, "Yeah." What are you talking about here? You know how many arrow shirts I had when I was growing up? I got to buy one once, and I was like a junior in high school. And my mom let me go to Adele and buy a fancy arrow shirt. But anyway, John Love looks at him and says, "Hey, bud, these are $1.25 a piece." Clyde says, "I don't care." I said, "I got money in my pocket right here." And so he said, "I need size 14 regular." So John got 3 shirts, a pair of shoes, a belt, maybe a pair of pants. And he had them all on the counter. And John said, "You want me to wrap those up for you?" This guy, he said, "Yeah." This guy said, "That'd be nice." And he said, I turned around, and he said, "I always carried my gun and my badge on my left hip." And he said, all of a sudden, this guy got really nervous. And he said, "Just give me my stuff, here's the money," and out the door he went. And John said, "God dang, what did I do?" John didn't have a clue. But my point, John Love, town constable, didn't have a clue who this guy was. Didn't have a clue who he was. But he bought those shirts from the town constable. That's the drugstore. That's a fancy drugstore. I don't ever, it wasn't Holy's drugstore when I was in Dexter. It was Eisenberg's. It didn't look like that on the inside. But anyway, Clyde Barrel, this is where he bought the majority of his medicines. His bandages, his peroxides, his aspirin, all the stuff that he needed to take care of Buck, and to take care of Bonnie, and to take care of Blanche's eye. The hydrogen peroxide, you know what they were doing with that? Remember, Buck had a 3-inch gap in his head. There you go. 3 or 4 times a day, they said. Poured peroxide right on his brain. And when Buck got caught, we'll get to that point, when he got caught and the doctors were examined, they were amazed as the devil. God, they would have kept this clean for as bad as this was. But Buck claimed, when they got to the doctor, when they got caught, he said, "Yeah, it didn't hurt that much." He said, I took aspirin. I mean, I didn't feel like eating much, but I mean, the aspirin controlled the pain. But they bought most of their drugs here. There was another drugstore in town of Dexter called Stanley's Drugstore. No relation to me, different clan, Stanley's. But the majority of their stuff came from there. Go ahead, Mike. That's Stanley's Drugstore. Go ahead, Mike. The guy on the right's John Love. That's the guy who sold Clyde's shirts. Okay? Now, this went on for 3 or 4 days, and people in Dexter saw them. They saw their car. People walked up and looked at the car. It was a dull red color with yellow wheels or something. Okay? It was a Ford though, too. But anyway, Clyde always, the people in Dexter thought, okay, yeah. And there was someone that walked up close enough and they looked and they could see holes in the car. And they'd been filled in with mud. Clyde did that on purpose. But they didn't, it's like, so what? I don't have time to worry about this depression. I don't have time to worry about that. But anyway, Clyde would always park in the same spot. This was strange. They thought this was strange. Always park in the same spot, always back into the space, and always leave the engine running. Still not suspicious enough. So, and there was one of my friends, her name was Maxine Shell at the time, Maxine Shell Hadley, she got married, but she was a 14-year-old girl. And she told me a story about she was uptown in Dexfield, and she said Bonnie and Clyde were there, the car was there, and he said that Clyde was sitting on the bumper of the car, and he was eating an ice cream cone. He said, and she said, his girlfriend was sitting in the car, and she didn't have any ice cream. How rude is that? How rude is that? Well, Maxine, I don't know. Probably was a little bit, but I don't think Clyde was worried about it. The guy over here on the left, there wouldn't have been a Dexfield Park shootout. Those guys, the Borough gang would have been out there. They could have stayed, gone, came back, stayed, gone, and they probably did. I'm guessing that wasn't the first trip out there to the park. That wasn't the first time they were out there. Hell, Clyde knew about that. He wouldn't have come made a beeline back there for it. But anyway, this guy right here, his name's Henry Nye. N-Y-E. Henry Nye was out there in that neighborhood hunting blackberries. He was hunting blackberries. When I first started doing this program, I'm saying, blackberries in Iowa? Wild blackberries? Well, I've hunted a lot of wild raspberries. The raspberries ripen 4th of July. 4th of July. This is July 24th. 3 years ago, I was out there at the site, and I had some people out there, and I'll go on with this. I got too many stories. Mike's over here going, tone it down here and get through this, right? But I was out there, and I was walking around, I was showing these people, and lo and behold, I walked through a damn blackberry patch. Was it the same one that he went through? It was 40 yards away from the campsite. Not the original plant, but it could have been the same. I mean, what I'm saying, they come back every year. But anyway, Henry and I was out there hunting blackberries, and he walked through their camp. They were camped out there, and he walks through with his blackberries, and he says, I see bloody bandages, bloody shirts, all kinds of nasty stuff, and 5 nasty people sitting around a fire. And he says, I don't make eye contact with them. He says, it's one of these jobs, I can see what I want to see, but I'm getting the hell out of there. He said, those guys are bad. He said, they're bad people. So he's a farmhand, so he gets back to his farmhouse, and he calls John Love. John, there's some people out here on this private property. It's private property now. You got to run them off. How far out are they, Henry? 3 miles. No jurisdiction. Lucky for John, probably he didn't go out there. And knowing John, I don't know whether he would have gone. But anyways, but he did go out there with binoculars, and he binoculated them out, and he said, I see 5 people and 2 cars. 2 cars? Where the hell did that other car come from? Where'd that car come from? Well, Clyde went on a car shopping trip. At least you guys laugh. I said to somebody, I said, Clyde went on a shopping trip to buy a car. So, well, so. Do you think Clyde Burrell ever bought a car? You ever think he bought a car from anyone? That's the reason why I'm glad at least a few, I don't know whether you just chuckled out of because you thought it was funny. But anyway, they wanted 2 cars because Buck took up the whole back seat with his condition. Took up the whole back seat, so they went to Perry, Iowa. And they were driving up and down the streets of Perry, and they were on 6th Street, it's in the northern part of town, and lo and behold, sitting in the driveway was a 32 Ford. Clyde loved Fords. Clyde loved Fords. You know why he loved Fords? Somebody said the flathead 8, and that's right, you're right. Go 80 miles an hour. Clyde was always looking for an edge. 80 miles an hour was an edge. John loved the car he had. 50 miles an hour, maybe? Maybe at the most. But anyway, they were driving up down the street and they saw this car. It was a driveway. Clyde said, WD, go get it. Gets in it, away they go. I talked to the Perry people, some relatives of the guy's car it was. His name was Ed Stoner. And Ed Stoner was at his dad's house and he was visiting his dad. And I figured probably they had to hotwire it or they had to do something with it. And these people from Perry told me, the family told me, and said, no. Ed went in to talk to his dad and he left the engine running. How lucky a break was that for them? Or a bad break for Ed Stoner. But anyway, so now they had their second car. But Clyde loved those. Loved the Fords. Give me the next one. Okay. It's coming up later. That's fine. That's the big one. But anyway, John Love did go out there with the two cars, and so he calls the county, the sheriff, and this is the sheriff.